Today's discussion is really about motivation, procrastination, goal setting, and pursuit. We are going to talk about the relationship between dopamine and motivation and confidence at the level of neurobiological circuitry, and we are going to cover tools that will allow you to leverage your dopamine in order to have maximum motivation to overcome sticking points, which include things like procrastination. The level of dopamine is the primary determinant of how motivated we are, how excited we are, how outward-facing we are, and how willing we are to lean into life and pursue things. By understanding how those things relate to one another, you will be in a far better position to understand why you become amotivated, why you procrastinate, how to ensure motivation on an ongoing basis, and even how to leverage effort and the desire to become motivated as a way to do just that. Dopamine is critical for overcoming procrastination, for ensuring ongoing motivation, and indeed for ensuring confidence. Dopamine is a currency, and it's the way that you track pleasure. It's the way that you track success. It's the way that you track whether or not you are doing well or doing poorly. Most people know that dopamine is involved in pleasure to some extent or another. And nowadays, people are starting to appreciate that dopamine is also intimately involved with motivation, drive, and pursuit. Now, of course, some people have a greater propensity to pursue things like work or goals in athletics or relationships or a combination of those. Neither dopamine nor the mesocortical circuit cares about any specific goal or pursuit. This is a circuit that uses dopamine in order to pursue anything. Dopamine has everything to do with how you feel right now as you're listening to this. It has everything to do with how you will feel an hour from now. It has everything to do with your level of motivation and your level of desire and your willingness to push through effort. Even subtle fluctuations in dopamine really shape our perception of life and what we're capable of and how we feel. But if ever you felt lethargic and just lazy and you had no motivation or drive, that's a low dopamine state. If ever you've interacted with somebody who just doesn't seem to have any drive, they've given up, or if you've interacted with somebody who seems to have endless drive and energy, what you are looking at there in those two circumstances is without question a difference in the level of dopamine circulating in their system. Let's keep two things in mind. There are peaks in dopamine. That is, dopamine is released into the frontal cortex where it has these effects of activating or suppressing action. There can also be troughs in dopamine. What do I mean by that? Well, we have peaks in dopamine, and that peak in dopamine can rise up and then go back to what we call baseline, or there can be a trough. It can go below baseline. But when you experience something or you crave something really desirable, really exciting to you, very pleasurable, what happens afterwards is your baseline level of dopamine drops. You might think, oh, a big peak in dopamine. After that, I'm going to feel even better because I just had this great event. Not the case. What actually happens is that your baseline level of dopamine drops. How much dopamine you experience from something depends on your baseline level of dopamine when you arrive there and your previous dopamine peaks. Dopamine is perhaps one of the most powerful molecules that any of us has inside of us, and the one that we ought to all think very carefully about how we leverage. How much dopamine is in our system at any one time compared to how much dopamine was in our system a few minutes ago, and how much we remember enjoying a particular experience of the past. That dictates your so-called quality of life and your desire to pursue things. Hard work is hard. Generally, most people don't like working hard. Some people do, but most people work hard in order to achieve some end goal. Reward prediction error governs virtually all aspects of effort and all aspects of learning. Reward prediction error also says that if we expect a reward and the reward doesn't come, that the pattern of dopamine release will follow a particular contour. What's going to happen is that my level of dopamine is actually going to drop below the baseline, meaning below the level of dopamine I had before I even started the habit execution. Because of the way that dopamine relates to our perception of time, working hard at something for sake of a reward that comes afterward can make the hard work much more challenging and make us much less likely to lean into hard work in the future. This has been observed over and over and over again, that people that have growth mindset, kids that have growth mindset, end up performing very well because they're focused on the effort itself. And all of us can cultivate growth mindset. The neural mechanism of cultivating growth mindset involves learning to access the rewards from effort and doing. When we receive rewards, even if we give ourselves rewards for something, we tend to associate less pleasure with the actual activity itself that evoked the reward. Now, that might seem counterintuitive, but that's just the way that these dopaminergic circuits work. Over time, we have the experience of less and less pleasure from that particular activity while we're doing it. The cognitive interpretation is that you didn't really do the activity because you enjoyed the activity, you did it for the reward. We are incredibly habitual organisms. Unless we intervene in our habits, they tend to carry out the same way that they always have once they've formed. The goal of any habit that we want to form is to get into what's called automaticity. If you have all these goals and things that you want to be doing on a regular basis, you'd love for them to be habitual because it takes less mental and physical effort, less limbic friction in order to execute those. Many people think that habits are just like reflexes, but pure reflexes are things like the eye blink reflex. Something comes toward your eye and you don't want it to get in your eye, you'll blink. Those aren't habits. Those are what we call hardwired reflexes. Anytime we're talking about habits, that means our nervous system learns something. Habits are things that our nervous system learned, but not always consciously. Sometimes we develop habits that we're not even aware of until they become a problem. There are popular books about habits, and there's a whole psychological literature about habits. And those two areas point to some very interesting aspects of habits that I think are worth mentioning. For the same habit to be formed, it can take anywhere from 18 days to as many as 254 days for different individuals to form that habit, which was taking walks after dinner. How did they know when they formed the habit? Well, they were doing it about 85% of the time, and they also reported not having to spend that much mental effort in order to get into the mode of taking a walk after dinner. People are highly variable, and if you can't form one habit easily, it doesn't mean that you can't form other habits easily. With each repetition of a habit, small changes occur in the cognitive and neural mechanisms associated with procedural memory. We distinguish between what's called episodic memory and procedural memory. Episodic memory is a recall of a particular set of events that happened, whereas procedural memory is holding in mind the specific sequence of things that need to happen in order for a particular outcome to occur. So think of it like a recipe or a protocol. The sorts of sensory events that we're paying attention to changes when there's a lot of dopamine in our system. Now, you can leverage this for habit formation. It's very useful to think not just about the procedural aspects of what you're going to do, but also think about the events that precede and follow that particular habit and the execution, or at least the effort to execute that habit. So not just thinking about how great I'm going to feel after, but also thinking about how hard it's going to be at the beginning, and then trying to reward myself subjectively for the entire experience. One thing that you've probably heard over and over about habit formation is not true. And what I'm referring to is this idea that if you are very specific about exactly when you're going to perform a particular habit, that you are more likely to perform that habit. The literature indicates that people who do that, who are very rigid about when they do things, tend, because of context dependence, to not necessarily stick to those habits over time. Some people do, but many people don't. And in fact, moving that particular habit around somewhat randomly can actually be beneficial to you, because actually moving it from one time a day to the other is that context independence that we really are seeking. It will have a significant shift on allowing you to engage in particular habits more easily and to consolidate those habits more quickly.
hypnotized. What's up is down, what's left is right. Chasing stars and holding you. I can't see the end, but we'll see it through. Times don't fly too high. Be sure to keep the ground in sight. Fly forever if you keep it tight. Love the world but keep the sky on your mind.